Please don't come to the head table, Lydia whispered without meeting my eyes. The photographer needs clean frames. I stood there with the corsage pinned too neatly to my dress, the chandeliers mirrored in the marble, and realized they had saved me a seat by the exit. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Some of us survive our families by learning to stand very still. They placed me at table 14, half hidden behind a column of white orchids. I smiled anyway, the kind of smile you practice in a mirror when you're young and keep using long after you should. The band started. At last, Crystal chimed. Laughter rose. I lifted my glass with everyone else and felt the moment catch like a thread on a nail. Back then, I still carried Richard in the small rituals of my day. The kettle set on the back burner. 2 cups even when only one was needed. The brass key in my cardigan pocket. He had built his life along the Carolina coast, the way some men build cathedrals beam by beam, villa by villa, testing each wall against wind and salt. 20 years. From Myrtle Beach down toward Hilton Head, people paid for ocean views. Richard paid attention to storms. He said they were better inspectors. On his last clear night, he pressed that key into my palm and spoke like a man measuring a final cut. Helen, listen to me. Don't tell anyone. Don't sign anything. One day you'll understand. He had already transferred the villas into a trust with my name at the center. $80 million of weathered roofs and hurricane glass, and something heavier than money, his faith that I would hold. At the wedding, I wasn't asked to light a candle or pin a boutonniere. I was placed. There's a difference. I watched Lydia, my only child, glide in on a river of silk, all light and applause, and I thought of fevers I'd cooled with the back of my hand, of spelling lists graded by nightlight, of the tiny crescent scar under her lip from a fall at 6. A mother learns to turn her body into a wall without anyone noticing. I had done it for years. That night, I felt the mortar crack. After the cake was cut and the toasts were tidy, Ethan, the new son-in-law with a salesman's smile, found me near the exit. Mother, he said, tasting the word like a shortcut, we'll stop by your place this week, just to make sure bills and paperwork are squared away. The sentence was smooth as lacquer and just as slippery. I nodded the way older women nod when 2 things are true at once. We understand, and we refuse to show it. When I got home, I hung my dress on the back of the bedroom door and placed the corsage on a saucer. The house breathed the sea through the window screens. I boiled water, set out 2 cups, and touched the photo frame where Richard's grin lived forever in flannel and sun. The key warmed in my fist. I didn't cry. I listened to the kettle, to the night, to the echo of his warning. A week later, the knock came. Ethan, a man in a dark suit, a folder heavy enough to bruise wood. Durable power of attorney. The cover read, letters fat and black. Steam rose from my cup. My spoon tapped the rim one small chime, clean as a bell, in an empty church. That sound told me everything. This wasn't help. It was harvest. I looked at the folder. I looked at Ethan. I said nothing. Silence, I learned, can be an answer that locks a door. The lawyer's briefcase clicked open like a gun being cocked. Ethan slid the thick folder toward me, his smile fixed in that salesman way of his. Mother, it's just a formality. Durable power of attorney. Lydia and I only want to make sure you're cared for. No mistakes, no complications. I stirred my tea, the spoon ringing once against porcelain. A small sound, but to me it was a bell tolling in a silent chapel. If you are listening, Richard, the storm you warned me about has arrived. I placed my hand on the brass key in my cardigan pocket. Warm. solid. His hand in mine, even now. You'll sign today, the lawyer added, voice clipped and professional, as though my life were an overdue bill. Ethan leaned closer. This protects you. Imagine how simple things will be once we manage everything. You won't have to worry about villas, accounts, repairs. You can rest. Rest. The word landed sharp. I thought of Richard hauling lumber in hurricane winds. He never rested. He built. He trusted me to hold. I lifted my eyes slowly. And if I don't sign? Ethan's smile faltered. The lawyer cleared his throat. Then your assets remain exposed. Mistakes happen. Taxes, probate, creditors, or opportunists. I cut in. My voice calm, each syllable like a nail driven into wood. Ethan's hand tightened on the folder. We're family. He used the word as if it were a crowbar. I said nothing. Silence pressed against him harder than any answer. The lawyer slid a pen across the table. Its point glinted under the kitchen light. Just here, Mrs. Marlowe. Initials first, then signature. I looked at the pen. I looked at Ethan. And then, without a word, I folded the folder shut and pushed it back. The silence stretched until even the kettle seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's jaw tensed. Mother, I insist, but I stood. Steady. The brass key in my fist. Tea is over. So is this conversation. They exchanged glances. Polished charm. Cracking at the edges. The lawyer gathered his papers. Stiff movements. Betraying annoyance. Ethan tried one last smile. Brittle as glass. We'll come back. When the door closed, I leaned against the counter. The house hushed around me. The roses outside tapped the window in the wind. I set 2 cups again. One for me, one for Richard, and whispered into the empty chair. They think silence means weakness. But you taught me different. Silence can be armor. The brass key pressed warm against my skin. Heavy and certain. A fortress in my pocket. The knock the next evening was lighter, uncertain. When I opened the door, Lydia stood on the porch, her wedding band catching the last of the sunlight. Her eyes flicked to the roses Richard planted years ago, as if they could explain the weight between us. Mom, she began, voice soft but already rehearsed. Can we talk? I stepped aside. She moved through the hallway, the way a stranger does, looking, not belonging. At the kitchen table, she sat where Ethan had sat hours earlier. Only this time the folder wasn't there. Just my teacups, polished and waiting. I don't understand why you refused him, she said quickly. He's trying to help you. We both are. Help? I repeated, pouring tea into the cup before her. By taking the pen out of my hand? She winced, fingers tightening around her saucer. You're alone now. You don't see what I see. Maintenance, taxes, repairs. One mistake, and all of it could vanish. I leaned back, letting the steam curl between us. Your father built walls to stand against storms. He didn't build them so his daughter's husband could sell them off to cover debts. Her eyes flashed. Debts? What are you saying? I did not answer. Silence hung in the kitchen like another presence. Pressing, unrelenting. Lydia filled it with a rush of words. Ethan loves me. He wants to protect what you have so it can support us all. That's family. I set my cup down gently. Family is not a signature, Lydia. Family is sitting at table 14, behind orchids, and still clapping for a daughter who placed you there. Her breath caught. For a moment, the facade slipped. She looked young again, like the child who once pressed her fevered face against my palm. Then she straightened, voice cooling. If you can't trust us, then maybe you don't trust me. I stood, walking to the window. The roses swayed in the wind, stubborn against the dusk. My reflection in the glass looked like a woman carved out of stone. "I do trust you," I said finally. "Enough to stay silent about what your father left. But trust is not the same as surrender." The clock on the wall ticked between us, louder than her breathing. She rose, pushing back her chair. "I don't know who you are anymore." I turned, the brass key heavy in my pocket. "I am the woman holding your father's fortress. That hasn't changed." She left without touching her tea. The cup sat cooling, untouched porcelain. I placed my hand over it, the warmth fading fast. Outside, the roses bowed under the evening wind, but their stems held firm. The next morning, 3 knocks sounded on the door. 3 quick. 1 pause. 2 more. I knew the rhythm. Margaret. When I opened, she stood there with a dish towel-wrapped pan in her hands. "Cornbread," she said simply, stepping past me as though she owned the place. The smell of butter and warm grain filled the hall, softening corners that had felt sharp since the wedding. But Margaret's eyes, sharp beneath her short silver hair, scanned the kitchen like a detective. She saw the second teacup, the folder tucked half beneath a placemat. Her jaw set. "They brought this?" I nodded. "Yesterday." She lifted the placemat, read the bold type, "Durable power of attorney." Her breath left in a controlled hiss. Not surprise, but confirmation. "Thought so." "Who pushed it across your table?" "Ethan." "With a lawyer." Margaret lowered herself into a chair, broke the cornbread in half, and pushed the larger piece toward me. "Eat. You'll need strength." Oh, we sat in silence, except for the sound of crust cracking. Then she said, "Say it out loud." "Helen." Quote. "Helen." Quote. Quote. When, ate, crust, crust, when, crust, 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 a. I looked at the folder. "They want me to sign. They say it's for my safety." Margaret chewed slowly, buying me time. "And what do you believe?" I touched the brass key in my pocket. Its weight answered before I could. "I believe it's for theirs." Her eyes met mine. "Good. Don't let silence become shackles. Turn it into armor." The words landed where my spine began. Armor. I repeated it inside, like a prayer disguised as steel. She leaned closer, voice low, steady. "A signature like that is a door that only swings one way. Once opened, it never closes. Ask me how I know." I waited. "My nephew tried it after Frank died," she said. "Came with flowers and a notary. Called it protection. I said no. He never called again." Silence cut, but it healed. Signing would have been a wound that never closed. I folded the napkin in my lap, pressing the creases flat. "Richard told me the same. Don't sign. Don't tell. One day I'd understand. And now you do." Outside, the roses brushed the window, shadows like lace against the glass. I breathed deeper than I had in days. The cornbread tasted of salt and butter, but underneath it I felt something sturdier, a plan forming. When Margaret left, she touched the safe in the hallway with a kind of reverence, not opening it, just acknowledging it. "Richard left you more than paper," she said. "He left you a way to stand." When the door closed behind her, I stood in the quiet, one hand on the brass key, the other on the edge of the folder. For the first time, silence didn't feel like chains. It felt like armor, hammered and ready. That night, the sea's breath crept through the shutters, salt in the air, the same as it had for decades. I sat by the safe in the hallway, the brass key warm in my palm, and let memory open what no paper could. Richard's voice came first. Low, steady, the cadence of a man who measured twice, cut once. These villas aren't just walls, Helen. They're proof. Proof that something can stand against wind and salt. I could see him again, flannel shirt damp with sweat, hammer balanced in calloused hands, sawdust tangled in his hair, the gulls circling overhead, the crash of waves testing every nail. He would run his hand along the beams as though the ocean itself were listening. If a wall can hold against a storm, it can hold against anything. One by one, I walked those houses in my mind. Myrtle Beach, where he patched a roof after a hurricane tore shingles away. Polly's Island, where we ate sandwiches on the porch steps while the paint dried. Hilton Head, where Lydia ran barefoot as a child, laughter spilling like sunlight over unfinished floors. Richard poured 20 years into those places. Brick and beam, contract and callous skin. And in the end, he placed them in a trust, with my name carved at the center. $80 million, yes. But more than that, his last fortress, handed to me like a torch. I touched the key to my lips. Don't sign. Don't tell. One day you'll understand. Now I did. At the wedding, behind orchids, I had felt invisible. At the kitchen table with Ethan's folder, I had felt hunted. But here, beside Richard's safe, I felt something else anchored. The villas were not currency to be traded. They were vows, sealed in hurricane glass and cedar beams, meant to stand longer than grief. I whispered into the hallway, as if the walls could carry it to him. I won't let them dismantle you. I won't let them sell your proof for scraps. The safe sat silent, paint scuffed, metal scarred from years of moving job site to job site. Ugly to anyone else. To me, it was a reliquary. Inside, deeds, trust documents, letters in his handwriting, proof that a man had built against storms and that he had believed his wife strong enough to keep standing when he was gone. I slid the key back into my cardigan pocket. The weight pressed against me. Not burden, not chain armor. Outside, the roses clawed at the trellis Richard had built from leftover cedar. Even beaten by rain, they climbed again each spring. I watched their shadows quiver against the wall and thought, they can try to strip me. They can try to shame me. But like the roses, I will climb back. Always. By noon the next day, I dialed the number Margaret had written on a slip of paper. James O'Connor, Richard's lawyer. His voice, when he answered, was low, certain. Helen, he said, I've been expecting your call. Expecting. The word struck me. Richard must have prepared him. Long before the end, within the hour, James stood in my kitchen, his briefcase scratched at the edges, his glasses slipping down his nose. He wasn't polished like Ethan's lawyer. He was steady. And steady was what I needed. Show me, he said. I slid the folder across the table. He flipped through the pages, lips tightening. Durable power of attorney. Immediate effect. Broad language. No safeguards. He closed it with a sharp clap. They want everything. My fingers tightened around the brass key in my pocket. Richard told me not to sign. He said I'd understand one day. James leaned forward, eyes steady. He was right. What Richard left you isn't just property. It's a fortress. But fortresses need maintenance. That's where we begin. From his case, he drew out a stack of forms. First, we refresh the deeds, re-record them in your name at the county. That closes the back doors. One paper after another slid toward me. His pen waited. We'll also freeze your credit with the 3 bureaus Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. That way no one opens accounts in your name. Another form, another pen, and we establish a healthcare directive. You choose who speaks for you, if you cannot. Someone you trust. Not Ethan, not Lydia. Someone who will protect, not plunder. Margaret's name rose in my mind, as steady as her cornbread. As James explained each step, I heard echoes of my classroom years teaching children to shape letters, to read words out loud. Now, words became bricks, stamps became mortar. Each line I signed was another wall raised, another gate locked. When the notary seal pressed into the paper with a dry thud, it sounded nothing like defeat. It sounded like a drumbeat, steady and protective, as if Richard himself knocked from beyond. At one point I hesitated, pen hovering. What if Lydia hates me for this? What if she believes Ethan over me? James didn't flinch. Then she learns the truth slowly. Paperwork is not emotion, Helen. It is boundary. You're protecting her too, whether she knows it yet or not. Oh, tears burned my eyes, but I pressed my name firm across the page. When the last seal landed, the table was covered in signed papers. A new architecture of safety, rising in stacks. James gathered them carefully, slipping each into his case. By this time next week, no stranger will stand a chance. Your fortress will hold. As the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the kitchen, shoulders heavier, yet steadier. The roses outside trembled in the wind, but the house itself felt taller, as if Richard's walls had risen again. I touched the key in my pocket. For the first time, it didn't feel like a reminder of loss. It felt like armor, forged and fitted. Lydia came alone this time. No Ethan, no lawyer. Just my daughter, standing on the porch with her purse, clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were already red when I opened the door. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" We sat at the same table where Richard and I had shared tea for 40 years. I placed a cup before her, but she did not touch it. Her fingers gripped the porcelain, as if it were the only steady thing in the room. "You've always trusted me," she said, voice breaking. "Why not now?" I kept my palm flat on the brass key in my pocket. The warmth steadied me. "Lydia, I do trust you. I trusted you with every sleepless night when you were sick. I trusted you with my pride when I sat at table 14, hidden behind flowers. But trust is not the same as signing." Her lip trembled. "So, you don't love me anymore?" I leaned forward, eyes on hers. Boundaries are not the absence of love. They are the way love survives without being twisted. If I sign, I lose more than property. I lose the chance to still be your mother, not your burden, not your bank. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. Ethan says many things." My voice cut sharper now. I heard him. With his mother. He spoke not of care, but of debt. Of selling villas to pay what he owes. His worry is not for me. It is for himself. Her breath hitched. You spied on us?" I listened. I said, "Because sometimes silence is the only way to hear the truth." The room went still. Only the clock ticked, and the kettle hissed faintly on the stove. Lydia's shoulders shook. "You don't forgive me, do you?" "Forgiveness is not the question," I answered, throat tight. "Forgiveness is for mistakes of the heart. This is about survival, about the fortress your father built to protect us. I cannot trade that away, not even for you." "One." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing into the space between us. For a moment, I almost rose, almost went to hold her the way I had when she was small. But I stayed seated, my hand firm on the teacup. Love had to take a different shape now, a shape with walls. When she finally stood, her purse strap twisted in her grip, she looked at me with eyes that could not decide if I was her mother or her enemy. She walked to the door without a word. I followed only to the hallway, watching the door click shut, hearing her car pull away. I returned to the kitchen, touched the cup she had not drunk from. Still warm, but cooling fast. Outside, the roses brushed against the glass in the wind, stubborn, unbroken. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the grocery store with an ordinary list in my pocket: bread, milk, tea bags, roses if they were fresh. The kind of list that makes life look steady. I parked beneath an oak, shade stretching across the asphalt. As I locked the car, a voice sliced the air behind me. Ethan. I froze, ducking behind a row of carts left crooked in their stall. The brass key in my cardigan pressed against my ribs, as though it, too, was listening. Yes, Mom, I know. Ethan's voice snapped, harder than I had ever heard it. I already tried the bank. They won't extend us anymore. Numbers don't add up. He paused, listening. His mother's reply was muffled, but his answer came sharp. If Helen signs the power of attorney, we'll have access. We can refinance the villas, sell 2 or 3 quick. That'll clear the debt. Without that, we're sunk. Do you hear me? Everything's gone. My breath caught, shallow. Bread and milk disappeared from my mind. All that remained was the sound of his desperation, naked, unpolished, stripped of charm. He paced 3 rows over, phone tight to his ear. Yes, I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. If she doesn't sign, Patricia, we lose everything. Lydia will help me. Between the two of us, she won't resist for long. She's old. She's soft. She'll see reason. The words struck like stones, hurled at glass. Old. Soft. A strategy, not affection. I gripped the cart handle until my knuckles blanched white. For a moment, fury rose, a mother's fury, a widow's fury. I could have stepped out, confronted him, forced his eyes to meet the truth he had just spat. But I stayed in the shadow of the oak, invisible, because sometimes silence is stronger than confrontation. A seagull shrieked overhead, landing near a dropped bag of chips. Ethan cursed under his breath, turned, and walked back to his car, still muttering into the phone. The engine roared, then faded. The parking lot returned to ordinary sounds. Carts rattling, children laughing near the entrance, a woman loading oranges into her trunk. But inside me, everything had shifted. I walked into the store, picked up bread and milk like any other woman, but I carried something heavier than groceries. Proof. Proof that Ethan's kindness was a costume, that his marriage to Lydia was a mask covering desperation. Back home, I placed the groceries on the counter, poured tea, and set out 2 cups. I lifted the brass key, setting it beside the steaming porcelain. Its weight was steady, immovable. I whispered into the empty air. Maybe to Richard, maybe to myself. You were right. This was never about love. It was about desperation, dressed as duty. The roses outside swayed against the wind. Their stems bent, but did not break. Neither would I. The knock rattled the door hard enough to shake the frame. Ethan's voice followed, stripped of charm. Mother! Open up. Stop being difficult. This is ridiculous. Through the lace curtain, I saw Lydia on the porch, her hands twisting at her dress. Ethan stood beside her, jaw clenched, folder under his arm like a weapon. I didn't open. I let his words slam against the door the way storms slam against shutters, loud, violent, but never enough to break. Do you understand how much trouble you're causing? He shouted. The company is hanging by a thread. You want us ruined? Is that what you want? My heart thudded, but my hand rested steady on the brass key in my pocket. When I finally spoke, my voice carried clear through the wood, calm. as stone. All documents go through my attorney. This conversation is over. Silence. Then his fist pounded again. You think a lawyer will save you? You're old, Helen. You don't understand how the world works. Without us, you'll drown in paperwork. Alone. Broke. I pressed my back to the door, the wood cool against my spine. I am not confused, I said. I am not broken, and I am not yours to manage. Lydia's voice cracked. Mom, please. If you love me, I cut her off. Love does not mean surrender. Boundaries are how love survives. If I sign, I lose you as my daughter. If I don't, maybe one day you'll understand. Oh, for a moment, there was only the sound of her sobbing, muffled, torn. Ethan tugged her away, muttering curses. Their footsteps retreated. The engine roared, and the house was quiet again. I stayed at the threshold, forehead against the wood, whispering to the silence. The line is drawn, and I will not cross it. Later in the kitchen, I brewed tea and set out 2 cups. Steam curled upward like a benediction. On the corkboard hung deeds stamped with red seals, green return receipts, Richard's photo in his checkered shirt. Beside it, one small slip of paper, my own handwriting. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I am still here. I touched the brass key, then set it on the table. It no longer needed to hide in my pocket. It could rest, visible, as part of the fortress I had become. Outside, the roses bent in the wind, then straightened again, stems unbroken. I lifted my cup, breathed the bitter warmth, and whispered, Silence is not surrender. It is my voice, my justice, my armor. End of Liebling. Those of lace. End of Liebringe. Where end of Liebringe? Thoses. Thoses. Those. End of Lido. Though. End of Liebringe. Where end of Liebringe? Though. Though still, the kettle sang low. The door remained closed, and the fortress held.